On the 5th of January 1944, Major Jim Howard led the 354th Fighter Group of the 9th Air Force on its 12th mission. The group's first mission had been on the 1st of December. Although Jim Howard was assigned this aircraft, for some reason he let other pilots fly it on the missions of 4, 5, and 11 January. Major Howard flew this aircraft. They were the first American group in the European theater to fly P-51Bs, and so acquired the nickname the Pioneer Mustang Group. Initially they flew escort missions for 8th Air Force bombers. The 354th Fighter Group did get the first P-51Bs to come off the assembly lines. Most of the planes in the group were P-51B1s, with no fuselage fuel tank and no cowl vents, but maybe 21% are B5s, which did come with a fuselage fuel tank. There were 4 flights that were ordered red, white, blue, and green. Major Howard led in the red flight. The 356 Fighter Squadron pilot roster for this mission shows the pilots who flew it, along with their aircraft letters, which is a rare thing. One pilot never got off the ground, and 3 others turned back with aircraft mechanical issues, leaving 14 pilots to complete the mission. Other flight leaders on this mission were Lieutenants Frank O'Connor and Bob Goodnight. Goodnight was bumped as leader of Blue Flight by Colonel Martin, the group commanding officer. Lieutenant Dick Turner is leading Green Flight, the last flight, which he preferred as it was likely to be the first to be split off to engage enemy fighters. In his 1969 book, Big Friend, Little Friend, Turner described the 3 squadrons of the group flying at different altitudes, with the squadrons furthest from the sun being 500 feet higher than the squadrons closest to the sun. I'm going to read the report Major Howard wrote that day, which was archived with the squadron's history and provided by the Air Force Historical Research Agency, part of the U.S. National Archives.
Kiel was the objective of the bombers that the 354th Group was assigned to give target area and withdrawal support to on the 12th combat mission of the unit. 38 P-51s took off from home base and steered a direct course to Kiel. There was a heavy overcast up to landfall at 12,000 feet, and then it became broken until the Denmark Peninsula, where it was clear. The whole area east of the Zuider Zee was covered with snow, making objects visible for great distances. Planes remained in the air an average of 4 hours. Rendezvous was made with the first bombers on their way out, southwest of Kiel at 11:50 at 26,000 feet. The bombers were apparently about 10 minutes early. No supporting fighters were seen, so the top squadron was dispatched to cover this box. 2 more boxes passed, and the middle squadron was sent to cover them. More bombers came out, which were under attack by enemy aircraft, so the last 2 sections of the lead squadron were sent to support these boxes. This left only 2 sections of the lead squadron to proceed on, where a group of B-24s were escorted over the target and out, although dense black smoke obscured the actual objective. Flak over the target area was light compared with that encountered on the way out, as the bombers made a diving turn to the left. It may be noted that the last box of bombers was separated by a considerable distance from the main force and passed over the target in the opposite direction. It was fortunate that fighter support was near at hand to escort their big friends out. Enemy aircraft opposition was encountered between Meldorf and Kiel. These twin-engine, rocket-firing planes did not receive the fighter support anticipated, for P-38s had engaged single-engine fighters just prior to our arrival, and what single-engine fighters were seen above were reluctant to come down and engage us, although the P-38s found them very aggressive. In general, the German pilots were concentrating too much on the bombers.
A consistent theme from Major Howard was, to give better support, the fighters would like to see a high degree of bomber compactness to make it easier to cover particular boxes. If the boxes were spread too far apart, the fighters sometimes didn't even see some of the trailing boxes. Here's Lieutenant Turner's version of the events from his book.
We pulled a mile or two in front. We could see a string of twin-engine formations about 5 miles out, coming at the bombers in a head-on attack. We were slightly higher and to the left of the oncoming Messerschmitts, in perfect position to hit them in a quartering attack from the front. But Howard had a different idea. He knew the least dangerous attack would be the obvious one, but he reasoned that a frontal attack would enable some of the enemy planes to slip through to the bombers with their rockets. So we held the squadron on course parallel to the approaching Me-110s in echelon formation to the right, instructing each flight commander to peel off to the right as he passed an enemy formation in a driving attack up the rear of their formation, thus scattering each enemy formation and breaking up their concentrated line of attack. We had learned that when German forces were broken up like this, the ranging Mustang elements around the bomber stream had little trouble in picking them up before they could get to the bombers. As the flight nearest to the passing enemy, I peeled off for the first attack. Leaning into a diving right turn, I radioed my wingman, the element leader, and his wingman, to pick separate enemy elements and to attack line abreast individually, in order to give everyone a chance for a kill, and to break up the enemy flight completely. Now, I concentrated on the rearmost plane of the enemy flight. Ahead, I could see the muzzle flash blinking at me as the rear gunner wrestled to keep his 7mm gun on me, but ducking my Mustang below his ship. I used his tail empennage as a shield and a blind spot of approach to get to point-blank range. I squeezed off a short burst. The Messerschmitt exploded in a flaming torch, spewing thick masses of oily black smoke, which engulfed my plane. As I pulled up out of the smoke, I found myself under the leading Me-110, which was breaking away to the left in an effort to escape our attack. Throwing a quick glance around the sky, I pursued the lead plane. In that glance, I saw German flights exploding in every direction. My Mustangs hard on the tails of those surviving the first attack. Those already hit were marked by lengthening splashes of fire and smoke. I clamped onto the tail of the Me-110 ahead of me as the pip settled on the canopy. Again, the brilliant display of API strikes began to play brightly around the fuselage and up and down the wings of the hapless twin-engine fighter, and soon I was choking on black acrid smoke from the booming fire which erupted from his fuel tanks. As the Messerschmitt fell off in an arcing ball of flame, I pulled up and around, adjusting my throttle and prop settings for a climb. I was surprised to find the sky practically empty, where before there had been hundreds of aircraft. It was a lonely and exposed feeling, and I searched for a friendly single-engine fighter with which to join forces. Finally, I saw one high overhead flying in the direction of the bomber stream that could just barely be seen from the north. Assuming the fighter to be a combat-dispersed Mustang like myself, I commenced a maximum climb to join him before arriving back at the bomber stream. Relieved to find company so easily, I kept sweeping the area around us for enemy aircraft, not paying much attention to the fighter above. Fortunately for me, I was climbing in an area which was a blind spot to his line of sight. As I came up almost level and a little to his rear, I realized with a shock that it was a German plane, a 109. Evidently, the 109 pilot got his first sight of me at the same instant, for he whipped the 109 into a violent wing-over to the left and split est for the deck. I rolled over and followed, determined to get revenge for my own stupidity. Halfway down, I overtook him, but the excessive speed we were building made it difficult to control the ship for sighting. I kept squeezing off short bursts at every opportunity, but was only able to observe a few random strikes and no visible damage. Soon my plane began to vibrate and buck, demanding all of my attention to attempt recovery as the ground was coming up alarmingly near for a vertical dive position. I remember the shock of seeing the 109 shed its wings below me as I struggled to move the stick from the neutral position. Reaching for the elevator tab control wheel, I eased it backwards, and the plane responded, easing out of the headlong dive. I looked down at the wings, hoping they would hold, and saw what appeared to be 3 or 4 inch waves in the metal skin undulating from the wing root, outward to the tip. I could hardly believe my eyes and quickly looked away. The struggling Mustang bottomed out in its dive, with only a few short feet remaining between us and the ground. We were traveling so fast that my eyes only recorded an impression of flashing treetops as I whipped into a screaming climb for altitude and safety. Regaining control of the plane and my courage, I set climb for the bomber stream once again, looking for companionship. Eventually, I found Jim Howard headed for home with a wingman. I joined up, content to let Jim do all the work en route through haze and soupy weather. But my troubles were not yet over.
And Turner's narration goes on to describe how he nearly crashed into the North Sea due to low clouds and thick fog. Turner and the rest of the squadron all managed to land safely. The archived 356 Squadron History Report summarizes the victories claimed by the squadron. Colonel Martin had 3 victories. Apparently he had a habit of sharing victories with other members of his flight, and in this case he shared 2 with Lane and 1 with Weldon. Lieutenant Miller, who was flying Jim Howard's Ding Hao, managed to score 2 110s. Bob Goodnight, the displaced leader of Blue Flight, still flew with Blue Flight and claimed a 110 and a DO 217. In Jim Howard's report, he states,
In all, our planes had a field day accounting for 18 enemy aircraft destroyed, 15 ME-110s, 2 DO 217s, and 1 FW-190. It was the highest scoring mission the group had seen so far.
On the 11th of February 1944, a newly promoted Captain Dick Turner became the squadron leader for the 356 Fighter Squadron. By the 11th of April, he had 8 aerial victories and 1.5 ground victories with his original P-51. Later, flying P-51Ds, he'd go on to claim 3 more aerial victories and at least 4 more ground victories. On the 17th of April, the group moved from Boxted to Lashendon Airfield. This brought them closer to the Channel front to support the D-Day invasion. From Dick Turner's book,
In the early morning of the 18th of June, we ran a dive bombing mission into France, which was completed within 2 hours. On the return trip to base, I hovered my flight in a loose orbit at 6,000 feet between Calais and Dover. With plenty of fuel and ammunition left, I was tempted to subtract a few buzz bombs from the many the Germans were sending over to terrorize London. I sighted one below and dived on it, pulling out behind it, but slightly out of range. I tried to close the distance, but the missile was just a little too fast. Eventually, one of my bullets must have scored a chance hit on the engine, for suddenly it emitted a long streamer of yellow flame and lost speed quickly. In a curving dive below, it fell into a vacant field and exploded harmlessly. Encouraged by my success, I proceeded back to the Channel area to pick up another. I began to wonder how I was going to get the next V1 because most of my ammo was expended and my gun barrels had burned out. Soon I saw another one and made a very steep dive to gain extra overtaking speed. This bomb must have been moving more slowly than the first one, for I almost overran it as I pulled out of my dive. As I flew alongside of the little monster, I had a new idea. I knew they were controlled by a gyro guidance brain, and perhaps this mechanism could be upset without gunfire. I carefully edged close to it and placed my wingtip about a foot under its tiny fin. Rolling my plane suddenly caused the V1 to neatly flip upside down, and it promptly spun in. Jubilant with my success, I flew back to Maidstone and hastened to tell the other pilots of the new pastime I had discovered.
Following D-Day, the group moved from Lashington, England, to a primitive airfield in France, A2 Creekville. By the 7th of August, they were moving again, southwest to Kiel. Over the next year, they'd set up new airfields further to the east as they followed Patton's Third Army across Europe. 2 of the airfields were in Germany. From Dick Turner's book.
On the 26th of August, I took another patrol of my squadron to Reims, and we surprised the airdrome at Beauvais during refueling operations. I took my whole outfit in on a pass and clobbered all the FW-190s visible. Pulling up to the left in the circle of the field, I saw an undamaged 190 sitting in front of a hangar, so I called for one more pass over the field. Ducking down to 20 feet above the deck, I came in withholding my fire until close range. When I tripped the trigger, the FW-190 exploded, creating a fire which poured into the hangar and engulfed the planes within. By now, heavy ground fire had developed, threatening to pick off someone in my patrol, and I liked the odds we already had, about 15 to nothing, and I wanted it to stay that way. So I ordered everyone to leave the area for rendezvous 10 miles west. I collected my squadron at the rendezvous point. And found all Mustangs were present and accounted for. Pleased at the squadron's brilliant success, I set course for our base, little realizing that I had destroyed my last German plane of the war.
This is the aircraft that Jim Howard flew on many of his January missions. This is Jim Howard and Squadron artist Will Louie on top of Howard's assigned aircraft in early January 1944. After Group Commander Ken Martin became a POW following a head-on no-flinch crash, Jim Howard took over as the group's commander, and at the same time Dick Turner was bumped up to Howard's old spot as squadron commander. I'm not sure if Dick Turner was still flying his original P-51B-1 Short Fuse Sally at the time of D-Day. In his book, Turner claimed the upended aircraft in this photo was his. Eventually it went to another 9th Air Force group. In June, the squadron received 2 new P-51 D-5s, and Turner borrowed one of those and scored 2 aerial victories on June 28th and June 30th with it. In the first week of July, Turner was assigned his own P-51 D-5, which he again named Short Fuse Sally. This aircraft originally had a dark spinner and a noseband with no white stars. It's claimed that Dick Turner as squadron commander was the one who chose the white star noseband pattern for the 356. Although Turner mentions nothing about that in his book. There's been some controversy about whether the noseband was blue or black. Artists portrayed it as blue for 40 or 50 years after World War II, before starting to assume it was black. William Hess, in his book about the 354th Fighter Group, described the nosebands as blue/black. Sounds like he didn't know which it was either, although all of the artwork in that book shows blue nosebands. It's been reported that squadron artist Will Louie, who painted the nosebands and should know, at least at the time, said repeatedly all of the 356 fighter squadron aircraft, both P-51s and P-47s, were black with white stars. They came black from the European depots. The white European theater markings applied to the olive drab P-51s were replaced with black theater markings, including the nosebands of the natural metal finish P-51s and P-47s. However, Will Louie's recollection of noseband color is questionable because he took up painting in the 1990s, and in one of his paintings of Max Lamb's late war P-51 D-20, he painted the noseband black instead of red. All of the 356 Squadron P-51s had red noses in 1945. Here Dick Turner stands in front of his red-nosed P-51 D-20. Apparently it didn't work out with Sally. Dick finished his first tour of duty with the 356 Fighter Squadron in September of 1944. He came back for a second tour of duty around May of 1945, becoming the commanding officer of the 354th Fighter Group. He only served in that role for about a month. After World War II, he went back to college and stayed active in the Air Force Reserves, flying cargo planes. When the Korean War started, he was surprised to be assigned to a fighter unit. He flew missions in F-86 Sabres. On one search and rescue mission, searching for a downed pilot, he forgot to raise his dive brakes, so his fuel ran out before his wingman's. He noticed his fuel was low and headed back to base 100 miles away, managing to milk what fuel remained, and did a perfect dead-stick landing. The best landing he ever made. That's it. Comments are appreciated.